It will give principals throughout this state the ability to have local control for the decisions of the kids in their schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sandoval. We understand that it'll be hard to divorce the budget issue from the education issue, but we'd like to continue now with another question for Mr. Reid this time. The school district has looked into privatizing school lunches, transportation, and found that he really could not save the money. So what evidence do you have that there are cost-saving measures to be achieved through streamlining, privatization, or more efficient operations?
I think we need to make sure we understand what we're talking about when we talk about privatization. When Cindy and I, when we were working on our plan, we met with everybody that would talk to us about education. And I will never forget a meeting I had with a bus driver. That bus driver passionately described his job and how much he loved it. And he told me about how he had a roll of quarters in his pocket every day to make sure that every child that forgot their lunch money or needed to call home had the ability to do that. He cared about his job more than anybody I've ever met. And when we talk about privatization, we need to make sure that we have qualified people in positions to do the jobs that need to be done. Transportation is a very important function in education. Parents trust the school district to take their children, deliver them to school, and then return them safely. And we need to use the highest standards, background checks, and do whatever else is necessary to make sure that our children are safe. Brian, in his plan, talked about privatization. The day he released it, Superintendent Wolfus of the Clark County School District criticized it because he didn't believe that it would save the money that it claimed to save. So I think we need to be really careful when we talk about privatization and make sure that if we're going to do it, that the people are trained and able to do the important jobs that need to be done. The other thing that I think needs to be pointed out about Brian's plan is that he says that it will be funded by room tax, $300 million of room tax. The problem with that, Brian, is that Andrew Klinger says, he's the state budget director, that there's only $95 million in that fund. So you are going to cut $533 million and you're short another 205 as I do the math. Now, we both went to law school, but I think my math's pretty good.
Your response, Mr. Sandoval.
No, thank you very much, and I'm not going to question your math, Rory. This isn't a math test. It's about education. And the question was about privatization. And privatization, again, I think what's important to know is there's that old definition of insanity. If we continue to do things the same way, we cannot expect different results. So I think that everything has to be on the table. And as I said, we need to break the status quo. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for the superintendent of this Clark County School District, and I understand that some of my ideas are going to be criticized because they're different, but they're going to be innovative. And we think, and I think, that there are folks out there that should have the ability to bid to see if they can do it more efficiently, if they can do it cheaper, and use that savings so that money can go to the classroom. We need to break the mold.
Your rebuttal, if you care to, Mr. Reid.
All right.
Next question. How this one goes to Mr. Sandoval. How does giving principals control over their budget stretch education dollars and lead to improved results?
One of the things I've done during the course of this campaign is I visited schools here in Clark County, Washoe County, Douglas County, Lyon County, Churchill County, and I've met with each of those individual principals. And what they'd like to do is have the freedom and have the ability to decide how best to spend their dollars. Now, right now, they may be locked in for textbooks and supplies that they can only spend a certain amount of money. As part of my education plan, it would use block grants. It would provide a chunk of money to those school districts, to those principals, so that they can decide how best to deliver education at their schools. A school in North Las Vegas has different needs than one in Henderson, than one in Sparks, than one in Tonopah, than one in Elko. So I think it's extremely important through my block grant fund to each of the counties that they have the ability and the autonomy to deliver the best possible education for the kids in their district.
Your response, Mr. Reid?
What we need is more people like Katie Decker. I was at Walter Bracken Elementary School for several hours one day, and I have never met another person with as much energy as Katie Decker. She's the principal there. And by the force of her personality, she brought her teachers together, she brought parents from the neighborhood together, and they transformed that school. We need to empower principals like Katie Decker. That's the hallmark of my plan. It's about giving every school the opportunity to innovate. And as I said before, Brian's plan would give certain schools additional funding and certain schools the right to innovate. And I think that we need to give that ability to every school. And Brian talks about block grants and this money that will be used in his program. But after he has cut the money that we've talked about that will lead to the firing of teachers, after he's done away with class size reduction money, and after he funnels at least $100 million away from public education, I just don't know how he's going to pay for it.
Your rebuttal, Mr. Sandoval.
Well, I'll give my opponent credit for one thing. He's consistently inaccurate. And again, I will challenge you to look in my plan anywhere. It does not call for the layoff of any teachers. I would ask my opponent to look at his own budget, and he conceded right here that he's going to roll over the furloughs. Well, that affects education to the tune of $200 million. But what's important here, we're dwelling in the negative. There is a lot of opportunity here for schools across the state, and I think my plan allows for that. It gives those principals, those school districts, those superintendents the ability to make the decisions that are best for their schools. The enrollments at all the different schools are going to be different. We have to be able to address the minority populations. We have to be able to address the at-risk populations. My plan would give those principals, those superintendents, the ability to do that.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up. Both of you say you want autonomy in the schools and gave great examples, but I still don't see how it leads to improved results.
No, I'm happy to respond to that question. I think it will lead to good results because, again, the principals will have the ability, when they have a block grant of money, to decide, maybe I need more math teachers, maybe I need more science teachers, maybe I need more teachers to address the folks that don't speak English. There are over 100 different languages right here in Clark County. Maybe we need to invest more money in technology. All those things gives them the ability. Maybe I need to have more teachers or smaller class sizes in 5th grade or 6th grade. That's the beauty of it. It gives the principals, it gives the teachers, it gives the superintendents the ability to make the decisions and customize an education for their particular kids.
You have a minute to respond, Mr. Reid.
Let me just explain what's going on here. Brian released a budget plan early in the year. And then I put out my education plan, and shortly after that, he released his education plan, I believe, to inoculate himself from my criticisms of his budget proposal. His education plan, I've read it, it reads like a Hallmark card. It sounds real nice, but there's not much substance there. Brian cannot do the things he's saying he's going to do because of his budget plan. Take just one aspect of it. If you just take the voucher proposal, that's at least $100 million that will leave schools like this, will not be available to schools in the public education system because Brian's made the wrong choice. He's chosen to subsidize the private education of a handful of students. 96% of the students in Nevada go to public schools. Brian's plan would help the 4% that don't. I think that's a bad choice. I think it's wrong.
Thank you, gentlemen.
We move on to our next question. We start with Mr. Reid. We're the 5th largest school district in the nation. Is it time to break up the Clark County School District into smaller districts?
I think we need to change where the power is. I said that when I talked about the plan that Cindy and I developed. We need to take the power away from bureaucrats in Carson City and Washington, D.C., and give it to principals, teachers, and parents at the local level so that they have the autonomy to determine what their schedules are, what their staffing levels are, and to some degree, what their curriculum should be. That's what my plan would give every school the opportunity to do. I think that's the hallmark of my plan. It will transform how we deliver education in Nevada. And if at the local level people decide that their school districts are too large and cumbersome, then they should make whatever change they deem appropriate. Now, let me give you an example. I used Walter Bracken Elementary School. Let me talk about them again. When Katie Decker and her teacher sat down, they determined that they had too many children with reading deficiencies and that those children with reading problems were dragging down every other student in the class. And they decided they had a great idea. They would hire 4 reading specialists that could rove around the school and pay attention to the particular kids that had problems. And they determined that the best way to fund that was to have their librarian go to part-time status. There was just one problem with their wonderful plan. Their plan would have delivered better education, it would have delivered it more cheaply, but there was a regulation that required them to have a full-time librarian. Somebody somewhere other than Walter Bracken Elementary and that community that surrounds it shouldn't be hamstringing principals, teachers, and parents whose only wish is to improve their school. Under my plan, Katie Decker and her staff could do what they want to do, and if every other school in Nevada had that right, we would transform the way we delivered education. That's what my plan's about, and you can't do it under the Sandoval plan.
Your response.
Yeah, thank you. First, I'd like to address that issue of vouchers. And I think my opponent makes my point. It's only 4%. We have people that wait in line to get into the career and technical schools. We have kids and parents that are waiting to get into charter schools. We need innovation. I think it's important for kids to have choice, and I'm not going to apologize for that. It creates competition. A rising tide raises all boats, and I'm convinced by having vouchers, by giving giving parents choice as to what school they can attend, a fabulous school like this, and I understand that you have to get into a lottery to get into this. It may be the beginning of several more schools like this. So that's why I believe that choice is so important. With regard to the question, breaking up the Clark County School District. I've asked that question, and it hasn't been, I've asked that question to the experts. It hasn't been demonstrated to me that it could save money or make the schools better. So given that answer, I think it deserves exploration, but as I stand here right now, I'm not sure it's a great idea.
Brian Sandoval's rising tide would only lift the ships of children that can afford a private education. That's the fundamental problem with his plan. It helps 4% of the kids. My plan calls for open enrollment. Every parent in Clark County and Washoe County and the other 15 counties in our state could vote with their feet. If a school doesn't meet the needs of their child, they could go to another school. That is true choice. Brian's choice is to help a handful of students, and he says it's a small amount, 4%. But if you multiply the 4% of the students that he's talking about times the $6,000 approximately that every child in Nevada is allocated every year, that equals $100 million. That's real money, Brian. And to cut $100 million from public education to subsidize the private education of a few is wrong. It would take money from this school. And I think that's a bad choice.
Mr. Sandoval,
Yes.
Our next question is from the principal of Whitney Elementary School.
I really want to know what you're going to do to bring in quality instructors into our state and how we can save jobs, especially at the schools like mine that are at risk.
And I really apologize. I didn't hear the first part of that question.
She said, I really want to know what you're going to do to bring in quality instructors into our state and how we can save jobs, especially at schools like Whitney that are at risk.